and thank you for this invitation for this very interesting dialogue. It's a very important topic, and I'll be focusing more on the emotional and economic situation of young migrants during and post the pandemic, particularly on the precarization of working conditions of young migrants. This choice of topic is interesting because myself as a migrant, I am going through a transition from my studies to insert myself in the labor market. And previously, even before the pandemic, the social rights of young people in Europe was already of my interest, and we discussed this a little bit in the Council of Europe, because this is a topic that does not receive a lot of attention. However, it's a very important and pressing one, which the coronavirus pandemic not only highlighted the socioeconomic difficulties of young people in Europe, but it exacerbated pre-existing inequalities and challenges faced by this group, and particularly of migrants. These challenges faced by this generation are increased precarization of work contracts with the normalization of temporary and short-term jobs, and informality. So this group has the higher rates of unemployment in Europe, and this situation does not provide any job security or enable access to social protection systems. Some unemployment benefits require some amount of time, or assistance like minimum income require a certain age to receive. So especially people who are entering the labor markets that do not have any job experience are in some way destitute from social assistance in Europe. And young people are experiencing a longer and more complex periods of transition, with longer periods before finding a job, non-standard forms of employment, and, as I said, lack of social protection. The young people during the pandemic, they were less affected by the disease, as it was said by the World Health Organization, but they were more harshly affected by the economic and labor markets crisis that followed the lockdown. According to the International Labor Organization figures, so with the end of non-essential businesses and some businesses that bankrupt, we had a huge amount of young people that lost their jobs or had to decrease the amount of working hours, which means decreasing their salary. And this is a particularly difficult time for young people trying to enter the labor markets after the lockdown. I'm talking from the perspective of France because now we are not in quarantine anymore. But the international organization, the International Labor Organization, is saying that in the short term there will be less job opportunities, but in the long term, also lower salaries, which will affect this generation coming from the pandemic crisis. So, of course, this generation is experiencing higher emotional and psychological distress. According to an European survey, people under 35 have been made sadder and lonelier during lockdown. And in general, there was an increase in unemployment and pre-existing inequalities. And these are the immediate impacts from the coronavirus crisis and the lockdown. But if I'm going to speak more about migration, this group, according to the International Labor Organization, was more affected, is one of the most vulnerable groups that was more affected, particularly domestic workers, those working in construction, manufacturing, and agriculture. But also, besides the economic crisis that affected migrants' lives, we have also challenges that already existed from deliberate migration policy choices that put them in more vulnerability in these situations. So I speak here about migrants, but of course this is a broad category, and within this group we have different vulnerabilities and different access to rights. So, for instance, regular and irregular migrants. Irregular migrants have been facing the issue of the exploitation, especially during the pandemic in countries such as Spain and Italy, in the farms. But also, we can think about third country nationals and European mobile citizens and the different challenges and access to rights they have. Although European mobile citizens have more similar rights to nationals, European nationals in their host country, they still have a lot of barriers to access, for instance, the welfare systems. Um, and also, we can speak about low skilled and high skilled workers that, of course, will face different challenges. Low skilled workers many times are in more informal settings and less possibilities to do social distancing, so they are more disproportionately affected by the health crisis. And high skilled workers, even though they have the possibility to telework, they also face this uncertainty about if they're going to continue unemployed or not, if they can maintain that their standards of living. So in general, young migrants face more barriers to access social protection systems, access to the labor market, and there is also the problem of what are their rights to reside, because many migrants that are here regularly depend on their working permits. If I give an example, in France, for instance, in a similar situation that I am, from friends that are from third country nationals, in order to transit from a visa that allows you to look for a job in France, and you need to find a long-term contract to be able to have a working permit. And as I just said, young people do not have access to these contracts so easily anymore. So we have lived in France for many years. We have conducted our studies. We have built our dreams or planned our lives in this country. And suddenly, because of, well, challenges that already existed, are even more difficult with the pandemic crisis, because people see these plans for the future suddenly crashed. So, of course, this has a huge emotional impact on every migrant's lives, I believe. Um, and young migrants can more easily see themselves in destitution and can more easily become irregular migrants and unprotected workers during these months following the pandemic. Um, I would just like to finish with one idea. I thought it was very interesting, this duality that even though there was a rise in xenophobia, either because of fear of migrants importing the virus, or either because of economic instability fed anti-migration rhetoric in some countries, we have also seen a growing acknowledgement that these essential jobs are the most precarious and that helped us go through the pandemic. And they highly rely on migrants workers. So I think maybe I'm being a bit optimistic about the future, but I do think that this acknowledgement in the public debate and political debates might lead some changes. Of course, I don't think that there will be a shift in paradigm in asylum and migration policy, but there is potential to consolidate some of these positive changes. Thank you.